Cheruiyot Kirui, a Kenyan who died on Mount Everest, wanted to become the first African to summit the highest point on Earth without supplementary oxygen.
On May 23, 2019, Kalpana Dash finally reached the top of the world, holding her arms high to honor a vow she'd made to her mother. But while the photos show a triumphant climber keeping a promise, the math of the death zone had already run out. 18 hours earlier, her Sherpa begged her to turn back, but she pushed through the overcrowding and a failing body. And by the time she collapsed, she'd been a walking ghost for nearly a day. It makes you wonder, how did a temple step grinder like Kalpana even get here? Temple steps to Temple of Doom. To understand how Kalpana Dash ended up as a walking ghost at 27,000 feet, you have to look back at where she started, which was about as far from the Himalayas as you can possibly get. Imagine a busy law office in Odisha, India, back in 1991. You've got this young woman, Kalpana, who just finished her law degree. She's set for a stable, respectable life in the middle class. But here's the thing about Kalpana. She didn't want the courtroom. She wanted the horizon. Her father used to take her on these small hikes when she was a kid, and it planted this seed that just wouldn't stop growing. It eventually turned into a full-blown obsession that most people around her simply couldn't wrap their heads around. She was already 35 when she finally walked into the Himalayan Mountaineering Institute in Darjeeling in 2001. Now, in the world of elite climbing, starting at 35 is basically like deciding to become a pro athlete in your retirement years. It's a late start, to put it mildly. But Kalpana didn't care about the timeline. She didn't have a multi-million-dollar sponsorship or a team of sports scientists. What she had was a backpack and a local landmark called Kapalash Peak. Think about this for a second. Odisha is hot. It's humid. It is not the place where you'd expect to find an Everest beast. But every single day, Kalpana would pack a bag with 66 pounds of weight. Literally, just heavy stuff she found, and she would head to the temple steps of Kapalash. There are about 1,300 steps there. Most people get winded just walking up to pray. Kalpana would do those steps 10 times a day. Every single day. She was grinding out 13,000 steps in the sweltering heat, carrying the weight of a small child on her back, just to simulate the strain of a mountain she'd never even seen. It's that kind of improv training that really shows you who someone is. She was a temple step grinder long before she was a high-altitude mountaineer. But here's where it gets interesting and, honestly, a bit foreshadowing. Willpower is great, but the mountain doesn't care about your heart. It cares about your lungs. Kalpana tried for the summit in 2004 and failed. She tried again in 2006 and failed again. Most people would have taken the hint by then, right? They'd say, okay, I'm a lawyer. I've got a good life. Maybe I'll just stick to the local peaks. But Kalpana had this undeniable grit that bordered on dangerous. In 2008, at the age of 42, she finally did it. She became the first Odia climber to stand on top of the world. She became a hero back home. Between 2008 and 2016, she went on this absolute tear, tagging 7 major summits across the globe. She was so dedicated to the sport that by 2017, she was donating her own expensive gear to younger women climbers in India because she wanted to prove that a girl from a middle-class background could conquer anything. She was the Everest lady. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth we have to talk about. When you succeed like that, when you've beaten the mountain after it told you no twice, you start to believe your own legend. You start to think that your temple step grind makes you invincible. She had done no oxygen climbs before, which actually hid a massive red flag. Her body was being pushed to its absolute physiological limit every single time. Every success was just masking the fact that her vulnerability to HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema, was still there, waiting for the right moment to strike. And get this, The mountain doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care that you're a lawyer or an inspiration to millions. It only cares about the invisible clock. Is there something you've been working at so hard that you might be ignoring the warning signs that you're pushing too far? By 2019, she was 52. She was older. Her body had more miles on it, but she had one more promise to keep. It was a vow that would lure her right into the middle of a perfect storm of human ego and natural disaster. 2019's perfect storm gridlock. If you follow climbing news, you probably remember that one photo from 2019. You know the one, a single long line of climbers standing chest to back on a narrow ridge, looking like they're waiting for a ride at Disney World rather than standing at 29,000 feet. That wasn't just a weird coincidence. It was the result of a massive systemic failure, and Kalpana Dash was right in the middle of it. Here's how the trap was set. Earlier that season, Cyclone Fani had absolutely ripped through the region. It wrecked the lower camps, and more importantly, it pushed the weather windows into this tiny, narrow sliver of time. Usually, you have several weeks where you can try for the summit. In 2019, because of the storm, everyone was squeezed into about 3 days. At the same time, the Nepalese government had issued a record 381 permits. When you add the Sherpas and the support staff, you're looking at nearly 900 people all trying to squeeze through a door that's only wide enough for one. Kalpana was part of a tri-nation women's team, India, Nepal, and China, led by Pemba Dorje Sherpa. She was excited. She even posted on Facebook for Mother's Day, calling her quest Buishi Everest, a tribute to her mom. She'd made a vow to her mother that she'd bring that summit glory back one more time. But think about that for a second. When you make a vow to your mom, especially a public one, the turn back button in your brain basically disappears. You've committed. You're going no matter what. On May 22nd, around 9 p.m., they left Camp 4. This is it, the final push. But as they climbed toward the balcony, they hit the wall. Not a wall of rock, but a wall of people. Because of the overcrowding, the Hillary Step, which is that famous narrow rock face just below the summit, had become a literal traffic jam. Imagine being stuck in gridlock on the highway, but the air is poisonous. It's 40 below zero, and your gas tank is leaking. That's what it's like when the Hillary Step jams up. You're standing still, but your body is still burning oxygen. You're burning through your life support, just waiting for the guy in front of you to move his boots. Normally, Everest sees about 4 or 5 deaths a year. In 2019, that number tripled to 12. And most of those weren't from falls or avalanches. They were from exhaustion and oxygen depletion caused by the crowds. It's a silent killer. You don't feel yourself dying, you just feel tired. You feel like you need a nap. That's the death zone taking hold. Now, here is where it gets really chilling. As they were moving toward the balcony at 27,500 feet, the delays were already becoming fatal. Kalpana was moving slowly, very slowly. Her Sherpas could see the signs. They were looking at her, seeing the way her legs were dragging and the way her response time was lagging, and they started screaming at her. "Go down, Kalpana! Go down now!" They knew the math. They knew that for every hour she stood still in that line, she was losing a chunk of her survival percentage on the way back down. But she wouldn't listen. She had that temple step grit. She had that vow to her mother. She had been dead for 18 hours, and she didn't even know it yet because her mind was focused on one thing, the top. She ignored the pleas. She pushed past the Sherpas. She fought through the crowd. Think about that. Would you have the guts to turn around when the summit is right there, just because a crowd is slowing you down? Or would the sunk cost of all that training and that promise to your family keep you moving forward? It's a choice that killed 12 people that year, and as Kalpana finally stood on that summit at 12:55 p.m., she had no idea that the very thing that got her there, her refusal to quit, was the exact thing that had already sealed her fate. She'd kept her promise. but the price was about to be collected on the descent. The invisible clock ticks. This is where the story stops being about a mountain and starts being about a countdown. See, at 2:30 a.m. on May 23, 2019, Kalpana Dash was standing at a place called the balcony. It's about 27,500 feet up, and it's basically the final staging area before you commit to the summit. It was pitch black, freezing.
Base camp all the way to the summit and back down again.
And she was already moving with this heavy, rhythmic sluggishness that mountain guides recognize instantly. It's a specific kind of slow. It's not just being tired, it's the look of someone whose battery is at 1% and the charger is miles away. Her guide, Sherpa, saw it. He didn't just suggest she turn around, he begged her. He saw the way she was swaying, the way her steps weren't quite landing where she intended. But Kalpana, fueled by that temple step grit we talked about, just shook him off. She pushed forward into the dark. And here is the terrifying reality. At that exact moment, Kalpana Dash was already effectively dead. She just didn't know it yet. To understand why, we have to talk about the death zone. You've probably heard the term, but it's not just a dramatic name. It's a very literal biological boundary. The line is drawn at 8,000 meters, or roughly 26,000 feet. Once you cross that line, you are in a place where the human body is no longer capable of acclimatizing. Think about that for a second. Usually, if you go to a high-altitude city like Denver or even base camp, your body eventually adjusts. It makes more red blood cells. It adapts. But above 8,000 meters, that process stops. You aren't living anymore. You're just dying at a rate you hope is slow enough to let you get back down. It's like being underwater on a single breath, except the breath lasts a few hours. The science behind it is actually pretty wild. At sea level, the atmospheric pressure is around 1,013 millibars. Up where Kalpana was standing, it drops to about 356 millibars. That's roughly a third of the pressure your lungs are designed for. Here's the thing. It's not just that there's less oxygen. It's that there isn't enough pressure to actually force the oxygen through the membranes of your lungs and into your blood. You can gasp all you want, but your blood stays hungry. Your organs start screaming for fuel that isn't coming. And when that happens, the invisible clock starts ticking. For most people, even with supplemental oxygen, that clock runs out in about 16 to 20 hours. That's your window. If you aren't below the 8,000-meter line by the time that clock hits zero, your systems just shut off. Now, there are outliers. There's a record holder named Pemba Dorje who once survived 90 hours in the death zone, which is basically a physiological miracle. But for a 52-year-old woman who had been training on temple steps in the heat of Odisha, that 16-hour limit was a hard ceiling. And wait, it gets weirder. Because Kalpana had been successful before, remember, she'd topped 7 summits and had even done no-oxygen climbs, she actually had a false sense of security. Her history hid her vulnerability. She thought her body could handle the deprivation because it had before. But biology doesn't work on a reward system. Just because you survived a car crash once doesn't mean you're immune to the next one. As she climbed past Gelbu's pleas at the balcony, 2 silent killers were likely already starting to move into her system, HAPE and HACE. Think of your body like a house with old plumbing. When the pressure gets too weird, the pipes start to leak. HAPE is high-altitude pulmonary edema, which is basically your lungs filling with fluid. You're literally drowning on dry land. But HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema, is even more insidious. That's when your brain begins to swell. When your brain swells inside a hard skull, things go south fast. The first red flag is something called ataxia. It's a fancy word for looking like you've had 10 shots of vodka. You lose coordination. You can't walk a straight line. Your brain is trying to tell your foot to move 6 inches to the left, but the signal gets lost in the swelling noise, and your foot just kind of drags. This is exactly what the Sherpas were seeing in Kalpana at 2:30 a.m. They were watching her drunk walk at 27,000 feet. Now here's a quick test for you. Do you know how to spot HACE in a friend? It's not just the stumbling, it's the 1,000-yard stare. It's someone failing to do simple math or forgetting why they're even there. It's a total breakdown of the person you knew. If you were up there, would you know the difference between summit fever and a brain that's literally taking on water? The most dangerous part of HACE isn't just the physical stumbling, it's the mental rewrite. When your brain swells, you often lose the ability to perceive danger. You get this weird, detached euphoria. You feel invincible. You might even start hallucinating. Some climbers report seeing people who aren't there or feeling like they're watching themselves from a few feet away. This is why Kalpana likely felt so confident. In her mind, she was keeping her promise to her mother. She was the hero of her own story. But in reality, the fluid was already building up. She was making decisions with a mind that was fundamentally broken. The invisible clock isn't just about oxygen. It's about the waste products building up in your cells. At that altitude, your body can't clear out carbon dioxide and other metabolic waste fast enough. You're becoming toxic from the inside out. By the time Kalpana left the balcony and headed for the south summit, she had been above the safety line for way too long. The overcrowding we talked about earlier had already burned through her safe time. She was now dipping into her lethal reserves. Think about that for a second. She's climbing toward the highest point on Earth, thinking about her mom, thinking about her Buishi Everest vow, all while her brain is physically expanding against her skull and her lungs are beginning to rattle with fluid. She wasn't just a climber anymore. She was a medical emergency in a puffy down suit. But because she was surrounded by hundreds of other people all suffering in their own way, her specific collapse was just another shadow in the line. And get this is the part that really haunts me. When you're in that state, you don't feel dead. You feel focused. You feel like the summit is the only thing that exists. The invisible clock doesn't have an alarm. It just stops. She was moving toward the peak, but she was already 18 hours past the point where her Sherpas knew she could safely get back. She was a walking ghost, climbing toward a triumph that she would never actually get to bring home. The summit was only a few hundred feet away, but the distance between her and survival was already infinite. As she stepped into the final stretch, the sun began to rise over the horizon, illuminating the peak. It looked like a victory, but for Kalpana, it was just the final tick of a clock that had already run out of time. Walking corpse descent. There's a photo from May 23, 2019, that looks like the ultimate victory. It's 12:55 p.m., and Kalpana Dash is standing at the very top of the world, 29,032 feet in the air. Her arms are raised high, and her face is mostly hidden by an oxygen mask, but you can practically feel the relief radiating off her. She'd done it. She kept the promise she made to her mom back in Odisha. She was the hero of her own story. But here's the terrifying thing about that photo. If you look at the way she's standing or consider that it took her 16 grueling hours to finish that summit push alone, you realize you aren't looking at a victor. You're looking at a woman who is already dead. She just hadn't stopped moving yet. The high of the summit is the most dangerous drug on Earth. It masks everything. But at 1 p.m., just 5 minutes after that photo was taken, the invisible clock we've been talking about didn't just tick, it rang its alarm. As Kalpana turned to begin the descent, her body finally went bankrupt. Gravity, which was your mortal enemy on the way up, is supposed to be your friend on the way down. But for Kalpana, it was just another weight. Her skin started to take on this eerie bluish-gray tint under her mask. That's cyanosis. It happens when your blood becomes so starved of oxygen that it literally turns into a dark, sluggish sludge. Her breathing changed from a heavy, determined pant to this wet, rattling gasp. That was the HAPE, the fluid in her lungs, finally winning the war. By 3 p.m., she made it back to the balcony, that staging area at 27,500 feet, where she had ignored Gelbu Sherpa's pleas just 13 hours earlier. But this time, she didn't just stop to rest. She collapsed. Her oxygen tank was bone dry. Think about that for a second. You're in the most hostile environment on the planet. Your lungs are filling with liquid. Your brain is swelling against your skull, and your only life support just hissed its last breath. Now, this is where the story gets really haunting. Kalpana died in the exact same spot as another legendary figure in Everest history, Hannelore Schmatz. Back in 1979, Hannelore was the first woman to die on these upper slopes. She'd also been exhausted, also begged for a bivouac, and also never woken up. For years, Hannellore's body sat right there on the balcony, propped up against her backpack with her eyes open and her brown hair whipping in the wind. She became a landmark. Climbers had to walk past the German woman to reach the top. It's like the mountain has these specific chairs reserved for those who stay too long. Kalpana was now sitting in one of them. Gelbu and Pemba, her Sherpas, were in an impossible position. And here's a question that gets people absolutely heated in the climbing world. Do you blame Kalpana for pushing too hard, or do you blame the Sherpas and the system for not physically stopping her? It's a messy debate. Some people say a guide should force a client down at gunpoint if they have to. Others say that at 28,000 feet, everyone is responsible for their own life. But let's be real for a second. At that altitude, you can barely carry your own weight, let alone a 52-year-old woman in a heavy-down suit who has lost the ability to stand. Dragging a dead-weight human body through a crowd of hundreds of other people on a narrow ridge is practically a self-harm mission. The Sherpas had actually known she was a walking corpse 18 hours before she did. They saw the ataxia at 2:30 a.m. They saw the slow, drunk-like steps. They knew the math of the traffic jam meant she wouldn't have enough oxygen to get back. But because she was the client, and because her temple step grit was so fierce, they couldn't break her will until the mountain did it for them. They stayed with her until her heart finally gave out. But by then, they were just witnesses to an inevitable conclusion. But Kalpana's family wanted her home. Bringing a body down from the balcony is a Herculean task. It eventually required a specialized recovery team and cost about $40,000. To put that in perspective, that's over 5.2 million Kenyan shillings. It's a fortune. They didn't manage to get her off the mountain until May 28th, 5 days after she'd taken that triumphant photo. Think about the irony there. She spent her life training on temple steps to reach the top, and in the end, it took a team of men risking their lives to drag her back down those same metaphorical steps. She kept her vow to her mother. She reached the Buishi Everest, but the mountain has a way of making sure that if you don't listen to its warnings, the prize you win is one you'll never get to hold. So, what do you think? Was Kalpana a hero who died for a dream? Or was she a victim of a system that should have never let her keep climbing past 2:30 a.m.? All in all, the death zone doesn't care about your promises. It only cares about its clock. And as Kalpana Dash finally joined the ghosts of the high peaks, a reminder that on Everest, the line between a miracle and a tragedy is often just a few hours of oxygen, haunted us. Rainbow Valley Warnings. When the recovery team finally roped Kalpana Dash's body down from the balcony, they were doing something that almost never happens on the upper slopes of Everest. Most of the time, if you die in the death zone, you stay in the death zone. There's a section of the mountain that climbers have nicknamed Rainbow Valley, and despite the cheerful name, it's easily the most somber place on Earth. It's called that because of the bright neon colors of the high-tech down suits worn by the 200 or so bodies that are permanently resting there. These aren't just statistics, they are landmarks. People literally say things like, "Turn left at the climber in the green boots." It's a level of grim reality that most of us can't even wrap our heads around. And to get this, even the landmarks don't always stay put. Remember Hannelore Schmatz? I mentioned she died right where Kalpana collapsed. For years, she sat there, a frozen sentinel. But during a massive storm in 1984, the winds were so violent that they actually blew her remains right off the ridge. She just vanished into the abyss. It shows you that even the mountain's graveyard is a chaotic, shifting place. Kalpana was lucky, in a way, that her family could afford the $40,000, that's about 5.2 million Kenyan shillings, to bring her back to Odisha. But for every Kalpana Dash, there are dozens of others whose families can only watch the weather reports and know their loved ones are becoming part of the mountain's geography. Now, here's where things get really concerning. You'd think that a tragedy like the 2019 season, with its 12 deaths and those viral photos of the traffic jams, would make people pause. You'd think the world would say, okay, maybe we've pushed this too far. But it's actually gone the other way. In 2023, the Nepalese government issued a staggering 478 permits. That's a massive jump from the 381 that created the gridlock for Kalpana. And the result? 18 people died that season. 18. It was the deadliest year on record. We're seeing the same patterns repeat over and over. Just look at what happened in May 2024 with the Kenyan climber Joshua Cheruiyot Kirui. He was an elite athlete, incredibly fit, and he was attempting to summit without supplemental oxygen. He was found just 19 meters below the summit. It's the same story of the invisible clock. Whether you're a lawyer from India or a banker from Nairobi, the physiology of the death zone doesn't take requests. If your oxygen runs out or your brain starts to swell, your resume doesn't matter. But here's the side of the story people rarely talk about: the ethics of the rescue. When a family demands a body be recovered, or when a climber refuses to turn back, it's not just their life on the line. Every time a Sherpa has to drag a human being down from 28,000 feet, they are flirting with permanent disability. I'm talking about frostbite that claims fingers and toes, or haze that ruins their own brains. These guides risk everything to satisfy the summit fever of foreigners. Think about that for a second. Is any Buishi Everest vow or personal goal worth the fingers of the man trying to save you? There's a massive debate right now about whether we should cap permits or increase the price even further to thin out the crowds. Some say it should only be for the elite. Others say Everest should be open to anyone with the grit to try. But as the Rainbow Valley grows larger every year, the answer seems to be written in the snow. The recovery of Kalpana Dash was a miracle of logistics and money. But for most, the mountain is a one-way trip. So, if you were standing on the balcony and you could see the summit right there, but your Sherpa told you that you were dead, if you kept going, would you actually stop? Or would you vote for a permit cap to save people from themselves? Just remember that the line between a hero and a landmark is thinner than you think. Kalpana Dash kept her Buishi Everest vow, but that summit photo cost her everything. She brought the glory home, but she also left behind a warning that echoes through every traffic jam at 29,000 feet. The summit isn't the finish line. Getting back to your family is.